Video, we're going to continue our development of the tracked vehicle. So I'm going to orbit and show you another part that I've created off camera. And we're going to look over what it is and how it works. And I'm going to show you the steps of how I designed it so that you can design it yourself. So the new part is this gray piece. And as you can see, it's sort of like the body of the tracked vehicle. Now, the reason why you're only seeing one side of the track is because it weighs down your system when you have both of them with all of the little parts. So I'm only working with one right now. So I'm going to head over to my tank body. And this is the tank body that we saw before. And so the way that I created this is I can roll back and show you. I started off with just a simple sketch. And so that's this sketch right here. And as I move forward, you can see I created an extrusion of this. That's my extrusion profile. And then I cored it out by using the shell command. And you can kind of see that these sides are missing. And we just have this little fillet right here. And that's really all that's left of it. And if I roll forward a couple more, you're going to see that I've created the holes for the motor to mount the motor to, as well as the holes for the idler pulley. And the idler pulley hole is a slot. That way it can slide forward and backward and be tightened. So as you can see, I've mated my motor to that piece. And what I can do is I can show you a cross section. So I'm going to come over here, section analysis, click on this face. And I'm going to drag all the way in. And what you can see here, if I show you from the front view, is you can see the two holes that are attached to the motor. And these holes are tapped holes, as you can see. And so basically what I've done is I've created a clearance hole so that way I can add a screw that's going to attach here. And as you can see, I do have a little bit of interference that I'm going to have to work around. So this tube piece, the green piece, is not going to allow for me to have my screws. So I'm going to have to downsize that a little bit. But those are really just little things that need to be worked out, and they don't affect the main idea of the assembly. So that being said, the next step that we're going to take on is we're going to add some sophistication to the pulley, the idler pulley. And what we're going to do is we're going to allow this pulley to spin inside the slotted hole. And so we're going to have to add a screw that goes all the way through and comes to the end and locks down. What we want to do at this point is add some bearings and hardware to this idler pulley. And so the way we're going to do that is I'm going to drag in these three parts from my data panel. So my data panel, I'm going to open it, and I just basically dragged in these three parts. It's 2 ball bearings and 1 Phillips head screw. And I downloaded these parts from McMaster because they're approximately the right size that we want to use. So what we're going to do is we're going to mate this screw. So we're going to do a joint mate. And I'm going to choose Revolute. And what I'm going to do is select the circle here on this screw, and I'm going to select the circle here on the pulley. And you're going to see it's facing the wrong way. That's okay. You can just hit flip, and that'll flip it the other way. And once you have it flipped, all you have to do is just drag it. You can drag it into place here. You can drag it to about here. Now, I don't know if we're going to have hardware under this part. That's something that we haven't really decided on yet. Now, in the case of this part, we're likely going to have a washer. So I'm just going to leave this about here for now. And so if when it's touching the face, it's at 133. So I'm going to leave this at about 190. And the reason is because my washer will probably be about 60 thousandths thick. Now, I'm not completely sure yet. It's just a wild guess, but that's what we're going to leave it at. That being said, I want to take some quick dimensions on these bearings so that I can create a bearing pocket. So I'm going to click on this circle, and I get an edge. For this edge, it's a radius of 0.25, so that's a 0.5 diameter. And so the thickness from this face, if I rotate it back, let me rotate this back. If I click on that face and I also click on this face, I can just take a dimension between them. And I'm going to have to try that one more time. I'm going to click on this face, and now let me rotate this, and let me click on this face. And the distance between them is 196. So that's going to help me a lot. Now what I can do is I can open up my pulley just on its own. So I'm going to come down here to where my idler spindle is, and I'm going to open that. And with it open, now I can actually work on this piece and add some features to it. So I'm going to see if I should change the sketch, the profile sketch here. So as you can see, this is sort of the basis of what we're doing here. Now I'm going to drag out a line, and I want this line to be 0.5 in diameter. So it's going to be 0.25 from this line. Let me just drag this out. And I'm also going to trim away these two lines which are not necessary. Now let me add some dimensions here. This is going to be 0.25. And I'm going to add a dimension here. And this dimension is going to be 0.196. And that's the full depth there of the bearing. Now the thing is, I made this 0.25. Now you would be correct in saying that it needs to be either a little bit more or a little bit less. But for right now, we're going to, what we want to do is maybe take away a little bit of material. That way it really has to sit inside the hole. So I'm going to make this 0.015. So that's 235 now instead of a 1/4 inch. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. So same pocket with the same dimensions. And the one thing that you're going to notice I'm going to do is I'm going to just link up the dimensions. So I'm going to click on this, and I'm just going to select that dimension, and I want to do the same thing on this one. I'm going to select these two. And that's going to make it very easy. So that's approximately what we want it to look like. So you can see on both sides I have a pocket. We're going to come back to our tank assembly, our main assembly here. And as you can see, I need to update, get all latest. Click on get all latest. And it's going to get all of the latest parts. And you can see that my constraint is now broken for the screw. It doesn't have anything to actually connect to because the hole is gone. So I'm just going to delete that. And let's put our bearings in. Let's rightfully put our bearings in. I'm going to hide the tank body. That way I can just kind of look right at the part. So let's do a joint constraint now. And this joint constraint is going to come revolute with this circle as well as this inner circle here. And I can just flip this back. And you can see that it is sitting inside of that hole, which is what we want it to do. And I'm just going to hit OK. And so with that done, the next thing we want to do is we want to add the other bearing to the other one. So I'm just going to click on these two, mate them. Okay. And so from here, this is already a good amount of work done. I'm going to unhide my body of the tank. And what we're going to do is a joint for a revolute. And what I want to select is this circle right here. And I'm also going to select, let's see here. We can select the bearing. And just like before, if you need to flip this, then you can just click on the flip button. That's going to flip it. So as you can see, I have my screw running through what I've just created here. And I can just kind of pull this out to here. And I can also go all the way to about 190 where I would have a washer. All right, so I'm going to hit OK with that. And that's around what we want it to look like. So what we need to do now is we need to add some hardware. And one thing that I'm noticing here is that there aren't many threads coming out of the end. So I may need a little bit of a longer screw, or I may need to just make sure that the washer I choose is thin enough, or I may need to change some other dimensions, or like I said, choose some different hardware. So that's just a consideration, and that's why we do CAD modeling. We want to see these little things before they happen in real life. At this point, we want to bring in some more hardware. And off camera, I actually moved the body and the screw out a little bit so that I can fit some washers here. So I'm going to bring in my nylon washer. And I'm going to bring in a couple of these. I'm going to place this one here. And we need at least 3 of them. So I'm going to bring in 3 of these. And with these 3, I'm going to begin to start mating these. So let's come here to our joint. I could probably hide some of these menus and stuff, make it a little bit easier to work here. Let me orbit this a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the circle here. And I want to select the ring on the screw. So I need to rotate over to that. It may be hard to see at first, but it's right here. And if I rotate this, you can see that it's actually attached now, which is what we want. And I'm going to hit OK. And with that in place, I want to add the other ones as well. So within this gap, we're going to add another washer in here. So let me rotate over to this. I'm going to create a joint, and it's going to be a revolute joint between this circle and the circle that's in here. And we can really just mate this to the bearing. So I'm going to choose this circle on the bearing. And you can see that my washer is pointing in the wrong direction. So I need to come over here and click on flip, and that's going to flip it back. And if we look closely, once this loads, you're going to see that the gaps are now filled. So what was a gap here between the head of the screw and what was a gap here is now filled in with the washer. So I'm not 100% sure that I want to have a washer in this spot. And that spot, if you're wondering, is a spot between the body and the spindle. But for right now, we'll leave it at that. If we need to change it, we always can. And let me add this other washer here. So I'm going to do a joint, revolute this circle, and I'm going to choose the bearing here, bearing face, circle. And again, you can flip it if you need to and hit OK. And with that now created, what I want to do is bring in a nut that I found, a low strength steel nut that's going to be inexpensive and is still going to do the job. I might want to have two of these that I could kind of use one as a jam nut. So I'm going to bring in one more. And we can start mating these. So I'm going to just do the same thing as before. And we're going to be doing a lot of revolute joints today, as you can see. Once that loads, just going to select this circle and do the same thing as before. And I'm going to choose the washer instead of the screw. And again, if you need to, you can always flip it. So I'm happy to see that we have a lot of thread sticking out. Off camera, I changed the screw to be a little bit longer. I believe now it's 3 inches. So it's now a 3-inch screw instead of a 2 3/4 long screw. So that's going to help a lot with this assembly. I'm going to select this ring. And that is in fact what we want. So we have our 2 washers stacked on top of each other as a sort of jam nut type of assembly. And usually you would want to have a full-size nut and then the jam nut on top. But because of the fact that these are so inexpensive, it's $2 for 100 of them. I really want to be able to use these because they're a very cost-effective and useful piece that doesn't cost that much. And I'm trying to make this as accessible as possible for people that want to purchase and build this project. That being said, we may want to consider maybe moving in this bearing a little bit so that it's not, so that the whole thing isn't sticking out like that and that there isn't a gap here. But we can always make modifications to that later, or I can make the modification off camera, which is really, I'm pretty sure anyone can figure out how to do that on their own. I don't want to have to show every little piece, or else these videos are going to be like hours and hours long. All right, that being said, and speaking of off-camera changes, an off-camera change that I did was I made this, the green piece here, the driving gear, I made it less long. So let me show you here what I mean by that. I'm going to come to Tools, Section, click on his face, and I'm going to drag this in to show you the change that I've made. And what I've done here is I've essentially made this a smaller piece, smaller diameter. And the reason is because I'm going to have screws here, I believe 3M screws, and I don't want the heads to be touching the circle. So that's really a pretty basic thing right there. But it's very important that that's done the right way. Let's add our final screw, which is a metric pan head. That's an M3. And this M3 screw is going to fit into our DC motor, and it's going to attach it to the body, which is basically just a plate. So I'm going to drag in 2 screws. And I'm going to mate them to this hole right here. So I'm going to do a joint. And I'm going to choose the circular cutout here after I choose the screw. So I'm going to choose the circle. And now I'm going to rotate to this circle here and select it. And that's going to place it in. And so what you can do is you can just rotate this back by flipping it if you need to. And we're going to do the same thing on the other one. And throughout this little test, we're going to make sure that the screw that we're using is not going to interfere with the piece right here. This piece, the green gear. So I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to do a joint, and I'm going to select the circle of the screw. That's this circle right here. And now I can rotate back and I'm going to select the circle right here. And once they're connected, I can just flip this back and I'm going to hit OK. And once they're in place, we can orbit this a little bit just to look inside and just see how it looks. And you can see that it looks pretty good. Now it's not interfering with our green gear piece anymore. These may need to switch to flatheads, but for now we can leave it at this, knowing that there's no interference.